fun. Okay. Had to lean over for that today. That's hard for an old person. Start with music. Our music today is with Doug Rich, and he has some friends, he says.
I do have some friends involved with me, and in light of our topic today of de-escalation and inclusion, I thought it would be appropriate to sing a Beatles tune. Well, what would you do if I sang out a tune? Would you stand up and walk out on me? Lend me your ear and I'll sing you a song, and I'll try not to sing out of key. Oh, I get by with a little help from my friends. Oh, I get high with a little help from my friends. Yes, we'll get by with a little help from my friends. Do you need anybody? I just want someone to love. I just need someone to love. Oh, I get by with a little help from my friends. Oh, I get high with a little help from my friends. Oh, I get by with a little help from my friends. Oh, I get by with a little help with little friends, a little help from my friends. Thanks, friend.
Glad to see, Doug, you have some friends. Invocation, Jan Loring.
Tough one to follow. I'm not particularly funny today. You can see by this shirt, we had a large group of our staff standing outside watching the parade go by for Joe Decio. So I'm going to read a little bit about this. Oh, I do that every time. And my husband always tells me, we can't hear you. Can you hear me? Raise your hand if you cannot. Oh. Okay, a penny for your thoughts. So I have written this, and it was emotional for me, so I have to read it. Today, many of you may know there was a parade for a young officer who died of heart problems while on duty. Transported to Memorial Hospital, he died 4 hours later. He was only 38 years old, and supposedly the picture of health. Many of you probably read about it in the paper. The manager and crew at our downtown store decided to all wear blue, and we bought these at the funeral home that they're selling. And I was impressed by our staff that they were so wanting to do this themselves. This wasn't our idea to be out there. It was our manager and the crew people. They bought the balloons, they got the shirts, they got them for Greg and I. They asked us to be there at 9. We waited for 45 minutes for the parade to start. Probably 700 or 800 police cars and fire trucks. So we were all in tears. It was pretty emotional watching this as they were all going through downtown Yakima and off to the Sundome, where the funeral was held at 11 today. Joe, of course, as I said, was 38 years old, a young man on duty, perfect health. One never knows. He apparently had a hole in his aorta. I guess a fluke. One never knows. But I'm wearing blue in honor of Sergeant Joe Decio. And I'm so very proud of our people, as like you, they are givers. And our manager and their staff excited to help others in times that are less fortunate for others that you all do. You know, that's why we're here. That's why we're in Rotary, reaching out and helping those less fortunate than ourselves. So if you choose, and only if you choose, because I know most of you pray, but some do not, and as I have always said, if you have to check your email and you're not a prayer giver, you can check your email while the rest of us pray. But if you're the kind that pray, bow your heads, please. Father God, we come to you this day with thanksgiving and gratitude for all that we have in this community and in this country. We still are in a country that's very rich with blessings. However, there's divisiveness, and and pain and sorrow and unnecessary deaths. We really don't know why, but we do know we need to unite, and we need to do all we can possibly do to help those less fortunate than ourselves as we move forward. Please help all these families that have had great loss of life, particularly those who serve us and help keep us safe. We pray in the name of the Lord. Amen.
Please be seated. That was extremely appropriate and certainly very heartfelt. We have some guests today. Rebecca Lee is a guest of David Links. Ken and Carl Corcoran are guests of somebody they know named Janine Corcoran. And BJ Thurlby is a guest of Ken Severin. And visiting Rotarian is Marge Henderson from Sunrise. Just a couple quick announcements or opportunities. How many of you here are taco eaters? You like tacos? Well, do we have an opportunity for you? On September 12th, the Central Hispanic Chamber of Commerce will be doing their annual Taco Fest again, and they need volunteers. So if you're interested, just go on their website, Central Washington Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, and look for the spot for volunteers. I know you all have lots of opportunities, but they would really appreciate the help. In a like manner, I had a call from one of our other service clubs in the Valley, the Yakima Lions Club. And I think most of you know that the Lions Club is very, very active in helping people in need with medical equipment and things of that nature when they're someone in crisis, particularly as most of us sometimes have had this experience. Unfortunately, I think more of us than not, with somebody who has to go to the hospital and then is released home but needs special equipment, such as walkers or a hospital bed or something like that. And the Lions Club often helps out those people who cannot. They need a place to store some of this equipment. So if any of you are in that capacity and can help them find a place to help store some of this material that's been donated, that would be great. Last announcement is a week from today is the Rotary Picnic, back after a year absence. So this will be the first time in 2 years. Our Fearless Social Committee has put this all together. Mike Hummel is the chair, and there will be lots of opportunities for fun games and food. Mike wants me to remind all the people in the social committee to be sure to be there at least an hour ahead of time, preferably before, because we'll have some tables and chairs to set up, some tents, and some other kinds of things to up. It's at Franklin Park. Please come. It's outdoors. Bring your family, friends. But make sure we know who's coming so that we can. So we make sure we have enough food, because the last thing I want to do is be the last one in line and there's no burgers left. So, or whatever. And with that, I will turn it over to Doug Rich's friend, Charlie Robin, who will talk about scholarship dinners, which I think is on your table.
Thank you very much. Indeed, on your tables you will find the yellow sheets, which are the sign-up sheets. Do note it's not only for whether or not you're wanting to host, but also whether or not you're wanting to attend. You will be charged as part of the standard that we have, for everyone who as a contribution to scholarships. But we do want to find out who are the fun people that actually want to attend the event, and who are the most fun people who want to host the event. And as a reminder for all the fun you're about to have, we have a tremendous selection of pictures, postcards on your table. You are welcome to take them home as a reminder to your interest and your commitment. So keep it as a reminder yourself, take that with you, but do please fill out the form so that we know who's actually going to be joining us, and then we'll get all the details pulled together from there. Thank you very much.
And we now have a very special presentation by Mike Maples, who is now approaching the podium.
Thanks, President John. Good to be in person with you, fellow Rotarians and guests, and on Zoom for those of you out there. And I didn't know we were going to have a grieving theme today, but that's kind of what it's about. And I know a lot of you out here have had the misfortune to be grieving in the midst of COVID. And that's very difficult and uncharted. For me, that started on January 3rd when we lost our good friend and fellow Rotarian, Dr. Douglas Corcoran. Doug was a member of this club for 52 years. And here, 7 months later, Ken and Carl and the rest of their family and 74 other of their closest family members are gathering to come to some peace and closure and to celebrate Doug's life. And I know that, and I appreciate that there was a moment of silence at a Zoom meeting when Doug died. There was a beautiful obituary in the paper, and last Saturday there was a wonderful story about Doug in the paper, and I recommend all of those things to you because I don't have time to cover all of that. I really wanted to talk about Doug's legacy. He was born to a legacy, but he also left a legacy. He was the third generation of family doctors to serve Yakima, and beyond just the service that he did in taking care of patients, he was very instrumental in a variety of things in the community that more than most people will ever know about that are having a lasting impact on the delivery, especially of primary care services in our community. A lot of you probably know that Doug started the first postgraduate medical education program, the Yakima Family Medicine Residency, built it from his practice with Stan Coffin in 1975. And if you were lucky enough to be here when fellow Rotarian Anita Manoyan, who's the recently retired CEO of Yakima Neighborhood Health Services, just down the street there, talk, you'll understand that Doug was instrumental in ensuring the existence of their services early in their days. But the story of Doug's support for my old employer, Community Health of Central Washington, is one that lasted for more than 30 years. And between us, Neighborhood Health Services and Community Health of Central Washington, that's more than 50,000 patient visits a year in the Yakima Valley. So, big impact. First of all, he was a trailblazer. The fact that he established that residency program and demonstrated that it could be done and demonstrated tremendous outcomes in terms of graduates who serve this community. Unfortunately, they've all reached the age of retirement, but he showed it could be done, and that was a huge leg up for those of us who followed in his footsteps. Second, he was never afraid to engage with the community. In 1989, 5 years after the hospitals elected to close his program, it was very clear that we had a primary care shortage, and the hospitals and community came together and created the Primary Care Task Force. Doug was there. Bush Preacher, who's here today, was there, and Doug was a leader and very influential on that. And their report to the hospitals and to the community was really pivotal, because that report said that Yakima needed a reboot of primary care education in Yakima, and that led to today's Central Washington Family Medicine Residency at Community Health of Central Washington. He was always ready to engage as boots on the ground. From the time of that decision making to do the residency program, that was in 1989 until we got started in 92, the Corcoran home was ground zero for all things about developing that program. I actually was living in Seattle at that time and doing shuttle diplomacy to keep the ball moving forward, and Doug and Helen always had a bedroom ready for me and a good meal and lots of ears to listen and help advise about how to find the path forward. He was a trusted leader during those first 10 years of the program. 92 to 2002, the hospital was owned and operated as a joint venture between the two hospitals. That is Memorial and St. Elizabeth. So as you can imagine, control was an issue. So they exercised their control by having an advisory committee. Doug was there. He was a leader on that committee. And in 2002, we come to the fifth and final phase, which is excellent nonprofit board leadership. 2002, CATW became an independent, not-for-profit agency. And one of the tasks that I dreaded about that transition was having to recruit a board. But of course, the first call I made was to Doug. Of course he said yes. I knew he would. And the great thing was that the next 11 calls were also equally affirmative. And those 12 people elected Doug to be the first chairman of the board of Community Health of Central Washington and re-elected him to stay in that position for 10 years, at which time he chose to step down. But he continued to be active on the board. It wasn't until he was 90 that he said, you know, I think maybe it's time for me to step off of the board. So we at Community Health of Central Washington, but really, I think this entire community is indebted to this man for his many years of dedication to that cause and his service to us. But we also hope to promote and preserve in the collective memory of the community an understanding of his contributions and his spirit. I was really pleased when the current board chair, Elizabeth Harris Miller, called me up and said that the board and leadership of CHCW have chosen to dedicate and rename their flagship, the Central Washington Family Medicine Clinic, which is also the home of the residency program, in Doug's honor. So that will happen in a ceremony tomorrow. Because of COVID restrictions in healthcare settings, it's a fairly tight invitation, so I apologize for that. But it will be live streamed, excuse me, on Central Washington Family Medicine's Facebook page for anybody who does want to tune in and see that. But the naming of this building is just a small way of saying thank you for his selfless volunteerism, of his time and wisdom for 30 years. I also just wanted to, in case you missed that announcement, there will be a public service for Doug at 1 o'clock tomorrow at Englewood Christian Church, which was his church and the church that his father and mother helped found. So, and with that, I'll just ask for another brief moment of silence for Dr. Douglas Corbin. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mike. And I would add to that there has been a long-time relationship between the Corcoran family and Rotary going back to his father. We helped support his father's work in China before World War II. And so there has been a history of Rotary and the Corcoran family and the service that the Corcorans have given to not only this community but to the world. And that's part of what Rotary is all about. So now with that, we have Bob Romero, who will be our Sergeant at Arms today. And while you are always generous when Bob talks, and you always listen when Bob talks, I would like to point out that I hope you'll be especially generous today because all our Sergeant at Arms gifts today will be going to Sergeant DCO's family and helping them through this time. So in a little way we can. So, Bob.
Thank you, President John. Today we're going to play everybody's favorite game show. It's called The Last Rotarian Standing. So I'm going to have to ask all of you to please stand up. For those who are in the Sergeant at Arms Committee and do fines, all you have to do is when everybody at a table is sitting down, the rule is once you miss 2 questions, you sit down and put your fine money on the table and it's all pooled together and they'll come along and pick it off your table when your table is all seated. So we'll get started if we want to go ahead, Carolyn. And here is our first question, and it is, from this day in history in 1898, this flag was no longer flown in Hawaii. What replaced it atop flagpoles in Hawaii? So you now have your answer, and the answer is There's a little bit of a lag there. The United States flag. That was the flag of Hawaii when it was independent before it became a state in our country. So if you didn't have that right, that's one miss. Next question. On August 12, 1981, IBM released a landmark new product. What was it? Answer, the personal computer. If you didn't get that right and you've missed two already, you can have a seat. Next question. On August 12, 1992, Canada, Mexico, and the U.S. announced completion of negotiations on an important document. What was that document called? If you said it was NAFTA, or the North American Free Trade Agreement, you are correct. And if you've missed two, you can go ahead and have a seat. All right, we'll move forward. And in 1990, a lady named Sue in South Dakota makes an amazing discovery. What was that discovery? Your choices are, this is multiple choice, so we'll go ahead and roll through these. Most complete T-Rex ever found, a wild boy living with wolves, a sand-buried Native American village, an active tar pit, or was it option E, which is a North Dakotan with a high school diploma and a valid driver's license? Okay. I said it was an amazing discovery, Charlie. So the answer is actually A, the most complete T-Rex ever found. If you have two misses, please have a seat. On this day in 1977, the Space Shuttle Enterprise made its first flight. Go ahead and let that fly, Carolyn, if you would. There we go. And then the answer, or the question is, with this, originally named the Constitution to coincide with the nation's bicentennial, the name was changed when a group of Star Trek fans mounted a letter-writing campaign to President Ford. He changed the name to Enterprise and invited some of the Trekkies to the first launch. Is this true or false? It is actually true. That is how the name came about. So, again, if you've missed two, have a seat. 1964, South Africa was banned from the Olympic Games. It was a ban that lasted for decades. Why was South Africa banned? The answer is apartheid, pretty simply. It was the discrimination and segregation policies of their country, and they refused to integrate their Olympic team, and thus the ban from the International Olympic Committee. Next. Born on this day in 1930, businessman George Soros, what was his name at birth? Okay, we'll go through some options for you here, and we can click, there he is, we can click through this quickly. Georgi Sorosky, Georgi Sorodosko, Yuri Soros, Goria Sorkonen, Georgi Schwartz, or George Soros, or possibly the last option is Hank Johnson. Okay. And the answer actually is E. If you did not get that right and you've got two incorrect, have a seat. That a little more difficult question. Okay, next. We're down to just a few Rotarians standing here. Famous births on August 12th. American director and producer Cecil Blank. Fill in the blank. And the answer, of course, B. DeMille, right? Next, tennis player, famous tennis player, Pete Blank. If you said Bandsmer, that's incorrect and pay double fines. The answer is Sampras, Pete Sampras. If you did not have that correct, have a seat. Let's see, what do we have left? We have two Rotarians standing here. So, okay, race car driver and team owner, Blank Jones. Blank Jones. The answer is Parnelli. Okay. So that took everybody out. Everybody should have fines on the table. And just for fun, hee-haw star Blank Owens was born on this day. Buck, yeah, we'll actually put his head back on Buck and let him move forward for you. And that concludes everything. For those who were the last standing, you win a tremendous prize, and it's the respect of your peers. Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you very much. I'm sure all the graduates all the people who are still standing had to be graduates of some college in Iowa. So anyway, to introduce our speaker today, we have Casey Core.
Hi, everybody. Our next speaker came to my attention last January in a newspaper article about his work in Yakima teaching police officers, jail staff, and civilians in what he calls deliberate de-escalation. Our speaker, Tyrone Campbell, is Executive Director of Callbox Training. That's a Denver-based organization that teaches how to prevent encounters from escalating into situations that put both officers and others at risk. Improving relations between police and the communities they serve is one of our most acute issues, and no aspect of that is more important than reducing violent encounters between police and civilians. In Yakima, we are familiar with the statistics of officer-involved shootings. Just last month, a police officer was involved in a non-fatal shooting. The suspect and the officer are both recovering from their wounds, following what has been reported as an exchange of shots begun by the suspect. How can we avoid such shootings and other uses of force? How can we reduce escalation of force to achieve less injury to civilians without compromising officer safety or public safety? What does proactive when does proactive de-escalation begin? And what role do all of us play in reducing unsafe encounters? Today, we have a nationally recognized expert in this field. Tyrone Campbell is a 31-year veteran of law enforcement, having served with the Denver Police Department and with task force from the FBI, DEA, and ATF. He has served as chairperson of the City of Denver's De-Escalation Advisory Committee and a board member of Denver's Racial and Gender Equity Disparity Committee. We are so lucky to have him today. Please join me now in welcoming our speaker, Tyrone Campbell.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to share a PowerPoint, and I'm going to go through this fairly quickly because I'd like to leave room for questions. I can talk on this topic for the next 2 weeks, but what I find is there's a lot of questions in the room, so I want to make sure that I leave room for those questions. So I'm going to start sharing my screen, and I'm going to go through these slides fairly quickly, and then when it's over, hopefully we'll have some questions to go over. So as Casey stated, I'm with Callbox Training, and this course is deliberate de-escalation. I am saddened for a couple of reasons. One is that I'm not in the room with you in Yakima. And the second, of course, is the funeral of Sergeant DCO. When I was there in January, I had an opportunity to meet all of the members of the agency, and I can't tell you how impressed I was with everyone there and what it is that they do, what it is that they're bent on doing, and how they're achieving it. So I'm a little sad. This is me. I started my career back in 1990. Back then, I was that little dude in the red circle there, but it has been a very, 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 very long career. It's gone by very fast, but I have done a whole lot. In my time there, I focused a lot on investigations, as you heard in that brief bio. But right now, my job is trying to fix 2020. My job now is what we call equity and inclusivity. So I am on a team that is basically trying to fix 2020 for law enforcement in our city. So big, huge job. In addition to that, I serve as the executive director of Callbox Training, which means that I get to travel the country and talk to law enforcement clients and corporate clients on topics such as de-escalation, human dynamics, interactions, and communications, and things like that. Today, we're going to focus primarily on law enforcement because that's what we're going to talk about. That's why I was in Yakima. Now, I want to point out that times have changed. When I first started this, I'm 52 years old, which means that I started when we still played dodgeball in school. And for me, I believe that getting the first punch in was the way you solved a fight. So understand, especially when I talk to law enforcement, they're like, oh, so you're going to teach us this touchy-feely stuff. Yeah, my inclination is still to step in. Understand, I'm still that person, but I understand that times have changed. Now, in law enforcement, one of the problems that we have is people operate in what we call this operational bubble. So a lot of law enforcement officers have only worked for their specific agency. And if they've worked for other agencies, they've worked with agencies around the same area. And there is a belief that everybody kind of does things the same way, and that is not true. So I'm going to show you what that means, because there's this assumption that we all in law enforcement possess the same level of skill, and there's the same expectation of how things go, and we know how to do it. Obviously, this video that I'm going to show you is not in the United States. But if you know anything about weapons and anything about handguns and handgun handling, you have a pretty reasonable expectation of how this course of fire would progress. Yeah, not the case. So when I'm talking to law enforcement officers and I explain to them that when people are asking for us to change or adapt or modify the way that we do business, sometimes they're not talking about them. We look at it and we go, yeah, but we're doing it right. Yeah, but sometimes it's not about you. Sometimes it's about our profession, and not everybody is trained the same way. In addition, let's look at this. It's October, we'll say. And she has the ball and she's running down the field, and we're on defense. And what is the job? What is our job? Think about that for a second. Our job is to tackle the person with the ball. That's the job. Now jump forward. It's March. He has the ball. Do we tackle him? The answer is no, because it's a different game. It's a different sport. It's a different season. And for one of the things that I explain to our officers is we are in a different season. I can train you how to be a police officer in 1992. The problem is we're in a different season. And if you try to do things the way that we did it in 1992, you are not going to have a job, because there are different expectations from our community. Now, I can tell you that I've worked with people who haven't realized that it's a different season. This is an officer that I work with. He's a sergeant. He was a sergeant, but he never updated his methods. This is the case that had him charged with second-degree assault. He's a good guy. He'll give you the shirt off his back. He just never understood that the season has changed. At its core, de-escalation is about safety. It is absolutely about safety. It is about the safety of the people that we deal with. It is about the safety of our officers, but this is about safety. We're trying to reduce injuries. We're trying to reduce the number of injuries that we have in law enforcement. A lot of times we talk about death. We talk about the number of officers that were killed in a specific year, but that doesn't even bring to light the whole problem, because the number of officers that are injured each year are around 15 to 16,000. Talk about the people that we come encounter with. Since 2015, they've estimated that over 400,000 people have been injured in encounters with law enforcement and security. 400,000 people. So understand, this is about safety. Now, here's where it gets interesting, because traditionally when we talk about this topic, we talk about it from the lens of physical safety. That's what we talk about. That's de-escalation. How do we keep people safe? That's great, except that's only one part of safety. The other part of safety is emotional safety. Doesn't do you any good to do this job if there's nobody in your life that wants to be around you. The dog runs from you when you come home. You're on your fourth marriage. We have a high rate of alcohol dependency and chemical dependency and prescription dependency and suicide, depression. We also talk about legal safety. Nobody wants to be the next officer on that YouTube video that's going around the country. I don't know if you've ever been sued, but it's hard to buy a house or a car or when you're named in a lawsuit. And the last one is financial safety. A lot of times we have people that get into our profession and they've never made the amount of money that we make in law enforcement, which is why if you go by some of the parking lots, you'll see the biggest trucks that they can find. One of the things I love is teaching at academies, and I step in and I go, that's interesting. You guys are in your fourth week. Why all the brand new trucks? You don't even know if you're going to have a job when this is over. But we don't talk about financial safety. The truth is, de-escalation is interwoven into everything that we do. A lot of times when people ask, and I get calls from the media all the time, and they say, well, tell me what this department does on de-escalation. Tell me what well, de-escalation is not necessarily a class, it's a mindset. And it should be interwoven into everything that we do, from the moment we make a traffic stop to the person that we're encountering with a knife. Now, I want to throw a little bit of fun out, because this is where it gets interesting. The state of Washington, as with any other state, has a certain number of hours that they require that you complete in order to be a police officer. Colorado, 548. Arizona, 585. California, 664 hours. Nevada, 679 hours. In the state of Washington, 720 hours. Now, I know that seems like a lot, but I want to go back to Colorado because, I got to rep our brand here. I know it only says 548, but my agency does over 1,100. That is the minimum. And the reason we do over 1,100 is because we have our own individual department training academies. And what we're finding in call box as we travel around is states that have a state academy, they usually do whatever the minimum mandatory is, so 720. Agencies that have additional training, which could consist of things like field training officer and on-the-job training, sometimes they go up and above that. But 720 hours. Now, that may sound like a lot because you're looking at it in comparison to 4 other states. But let's look at the state of Washington and what it says. 720 hours to be a police officer, but you need 750 to be an esthetician. In order to be a barber, you need 1,000 hours. And I'm not sure, but I hear that hair grows back. I don't know because I keep mine shaved. But how about a cosmetologist? 1,600 hours. But for a police officer, you only need 720. When you compare it to other fields out there, that's where it really, really becomes highlighted, because in order to be an attorney, you need a 4-year college degree. You need 3 years of law school. You need to pass the bar. And you're going to rack up about $110,000 in debt. In order to be a doctor, you need 4 years of college, 4 years of medical school, 3 years of residency, 1 year of fellowship, and you're going to rack up about $270,000. And our police officers, with their 700 hours of training, have to be able to write like an attorney and provide medical training and assessments like a doctor in some cases. Matter of fact, here's where this gets fun. Let's say that you're a doctor. Let's say that you're a psychologist or psychiatrist. Your entire field of study has to do with brain development. You know the DSM-5 backwards and forward. But if somebody in your office freaks out, who do you call? That officer with 720 hours of training. That's the struggle that exists in our profession. And that's not even taking into account that de-escalation is inherently abnormal. The normal person engages what we call fight, flight, or freeze. Except de-escalation is not that. De-escalation is don't fight. De-escalation is don't freeze, don't flee. Actually, we want you to freeze for a moment and make an assessment, and then determine a course of action. And that's inherently abnormal to how we as humans behave. So when we teach this topic, we break it into 3 categories. Number 1 is escalation. There's an issue though. A lot of the young people that we're bringing into our profession don't understand what escalation looks like. I'm telling you this from experience. A lot of the young people we're bringing into our profession have never been punched in the face. And don't get me wrong, nobody wants to be punched in the face. But it's something that we have to realize may happen. And if you don't know how to assess risk, if you don't know how to assess escalation or behavior cues, you may misread them. We have to focus, and we tell people that when we talk about de-escalation, we're talking about from the point of contact. When you come in contact with somebody, do they go up or do they go down? That is escalation or de-escalation. We have people that say, oh, I was talking to this person and their voice was raised. Yeah, when you got them. But did you realize that after you were talking to them for 10, 15 seconds, their voice started to go down? You were achieving de-escalation, just not as fast as you wanted. You have to develop a baseline so you know where they're going. We have to talk about non-escalation. Before we can talk about making things better, we have to talk about not making things worse. So we focus on emotional intelligence, self-awareness. We have some people who don't realize that they say things that frustrate people or upset people. We have to focus on self-management. We have people who go, I know that what I say upsets people, but I can't stop myself. We have people that don't have high scores in social awareness, which means that they don't even realize how people are reading them. And then we have people that are low in what we call relationship management. Relationship management means, look, I realize all of these things, I just don't see why it matters. So we spend a lot of time talking about EI. And that's all before we actually get to the topic of de-escalation. When we talk about de-escalation, we have a working definition that goes like this. De-escalation is the practice of effectively and safely diffusing tense, non-immediate action situations through the use of communication skills, thorough assessments, and tactical strategies that reduce the chances of force being used unnecessarily. That's de-escalation. It doesn't say that we're never going to have to put our hands on anyone. It doesn't say that we're never going to not upset anyone. It says that we're going to do the best we can to reduce the chances that we're going to use force when we don't have to. Matter of fact, sometimes we talk to law enforcement and we get some of our agencies who go, you know what, de-escalation is getting officers killed. And we go, no, it's not. You're talking about an immediate action event. And during an immediate action event, you should be doing immediate action things. What we're talking about is non-immediate action. And if it's non-immediate action, then you have time to use some of these other skills, which is why we focus on what we call distance, shielding, and time. If you create distance, you develop what we call a reactionary gap. If you can put shielding in place and put something between you, a barrier, something that will prevent the person from doing harm to you, you get time. And with time, we can get other resources to the table. We can let the person that we're dealing with calm down. We can allow us in law enforcement to calm down. Look, people ask, how long are these situations supposed to take? And the new answer is as long as it takes. Because slowing things down increases the likelihood of the people that we're dealing with and the officers going home safely. So why would we not slow it down? So the actual process of how we do de-escalation goes like this. We start by developing what we call rapport, which is a close, harmonious relationship with the people that we're dealing with. I describe it very simply as trying to talk about something other than the reason that we're there. And if you can develop a rapport, you can calm things down. Then what we do is we look for what we call a win. What's important to this person? This person that I'm dealing with, what's important to this person? It usually is about one of 6 things. For most people, it's time or money, but it's usually one of 6 things. And it's whichever one they have least of at the moment. But if you can develop an understanding of what's important to that person, then you have something to use. You have something to offer, which gets us to what we call requisite variety. You have to have options. If I have more ways to get you to say yes than you have ways to say no, I win. If I'm selling a truck and you come into my dealership to buy a truck, if I have 5 ways to get you to say yes and you only have 3 ways to say no, I win. That's the bottom line. I'm going to talk to you about a contract. I have 5 ways to get you to sign this contract and you have 3 ways to say no, I win. Now, the message that you use and the options that you put on the table have to fall within these 4 categories. It has to be legal, has to be necessary, has to be reasonable and appropriate. You want to know what your officers are being taught? This is the lens through which they're being viewed. Your actions have to be legal, necessary, reasonable, and appropriate. And if you can say yes on all of those, we can probably defend you. We can probably support you. But if you're saying no to any one of those, how, as a city, as an administration, as a profession, can we come to your defense? Now, people ask all the time, What do you tell the bosses? Well, that's a great question, right? Because we're talking boots on the ground. So here's what we explain to the bosses. When I talk to city administrators and I talk to chiefs, I explain a couple of things. Number one, I want you to think about a road trip. You're driving down the road and off in the distance, you see those golden arches. What does that mean? Well, I have a 13-year-old daughter and we sometimes road trip. And we've been doing it since she was a kid. What that means is there's a place to use the bathroom. It means it's a place to stop and park the car. It means it's a place I can get Wi-Fi and check my email. If you're hungry, it means a number one is a number one is a number one. Doesn't matter if you're here or in Hong Kong, a number one is still a Big Mac. Seems like a weird way to get to the topic, right? But what I'm talking about is branding. What do people think about and what message do they receive when they see your brand, when they see your logo, when they see your patch? Now, lately we've been talking about how we find officers, recruit officers, and what it is that we're looking for. And we're looking for three things. It started out with one. We look for officers with the right skill set. That was it. We want officers that have the right skill set. And then we adapted. We said, that's great. We can teach you to shoot. We can teach you to drive. We can teach you to do all these things. So we want people with the right skill set and the right mindset. But I can tell you that now what we're looking for is officers that have the right skill set, the right mindset, and the right heart set. How do you fix 2020? We hire officers. We encourage the ones that we do have, and we enable them to use the right skill set, the right mindset, and the right heart set. Now, I'm going to wrap this up because I want to leave time for questions. But in doing so, I want to read you an email. And it's an email from Chief Murray, your chief, that was written in September of last year. Because I'm going to show you how you cultivate the right heart set. It starts like this. Good morning, Yakima PD. Now, I teach interview and interrogation. So it's hard for me to read this without reading in my own little assessment. So I'm going to throw some of that in. You may not know it, but we had a homicide last night about 9 p.m. The victim was 14 years old. That is typically the age of an 8th grade student. Too young to go to prom, too young to play high school baseball, too young to buy a ticket to an R-rated movie. When I read that, what I hear is, this is to the people who were there, but this is also to, even if you weren't there, this is for you. You may not know about it, but I want you to know about it. And then he took the victim in this homicide and personalized him. This is who it was. And I want you to put this in context with where you were at 14 years of age. But in our profession, we still have people who are like, yeah, but. So he addresses it. Yeah, but. He was a documented gang member in a house that was flagged for gunshots the day before. But I drive by that house every single morning abating graffiti. Many folks stroll the bike path out front each day. He just told the officers who say, yeah, but. I hear you. I know what you're thinking. But he also said, think about the people who have absolutely nothing to do with what you perceive this guy to be associated with. But that's just East Yakima, right? Wrong. We have to do better. All of us. We have to innovate, plan, deliver, and persist. There's no one else to call. We have to be shaken when these tragedies occur. Please take some time to reflect on this horrific loss of life and seek opportunities to change the narrative. We all need to ask, what more can I do? What can I do better? Chief. Now, I read that because it's a great example. I talk to chiefs all around the country and they all say the same thing. It's like, that's great, but how do you cultivate the right heart set? How do you empower your people to get out of their cars and talk to their community. Because if you do that, it's not just the kid on the corner, that's Johnny. And when you know the person, you're willing to give the person a little more time. Look, I was in Yakima. I spent a couple of weeks there. I loved it. But I know that the officers in some cases know that there are two different Walmarts. I know that they differentiate between East Yakima and West Yakima. So my question that I asked them in class is the way that we policed in East Yakima consistent with how we police in West Yakima? Should it be the same? Should we afford people the same amount of time to resolve issues? Should we use the same de-escalation techniques? That's a wrap up of what I did when I was talking to your officers. Obviously, what we do and what we talk about is much, much, much more in depth. And as I said, we can talk for days and days and days. But I want to give time to answer questions that might come up. As I told the media when I was there, I consider myself to be chamomile tea. I'm not everybody's cup of tea, but if you like chamomile, you like me. And I say that to tell you, I'm going to tell you the truth. There's no reason for me to candy coat it. So ask away.
Do you want to come up here, Janine? Then he could see you at the same time.
Thank you. The question is, you were talking about training hours for officers, and I agree with you. I can't imagine being an officer right now. So what do you think about taking money from the police? Don't we need more for training?
So it depends on where that monies are going. So obviously, I would never say just take money blanketly from the police. That being said, there are agencies around the country that are reallocating funds. And what they're doing is they're hiring more civilians to do things like non-emergent calls. My wife is a civilian with our department. And what that means is, let's say someone's car gets stolen. There's no bad guy on scene. The suspect has been gone for 4 hours. She has the ability to go and take that report. And because she's not pressured for time the same way our officers are, it's a completely different situation. So if we're talking about hiring additional mental health personnel, hiring civilian personnel that support our armed staff, absolutely. But just to take money away, just to take it away, there's no sense. That's my assessment.
Historically, it's my understanding that police officers were trained when presented with a contentious situation of an offender that they wanted to present themselves with force and to take over the situation and command it, demonstrate they were prepared to use overwhelming force. Is that training changing?
Absolutely. We used to teach a very simple premise, and it was called, if you're wrong, be wrong strong, right? Even if I didn't know the answer, I'm going to throw my shoulders back and poke my chest out and act like I do. And that overwhelming show of force, there was a time for that. That being said, now is not that time. In our city, one of the things that we do, I spent 12 years as a hostage negotiator, and we would have a barricaded situation. And the first thing we would do is we would slow things down and we go and write a search warrant. And we have officers on the scene who say, we don't need a search warrant. No, you're right. Legally, we don't. But what we just did was we gave the person that's in that house an extra hour to calm down. We gave our personnel outside an extra hour to calm down. And what happens is usually people go, you know what? This is not going to work well for me. This is not going to work out the way I thought it was. It depends on what the situation is. If it's an immediate action event, then absolutely we take immediate action measures and we move in with a show of force. If it's not, throwing our shoulders back and trying to bully, it doesn't work anymore. It doesn't look good. And the sad fact is we are now in a place where if something is caught on camera, either body camera or city camera or cell phone, it has the potential to cost your agency and your city millions of dollars because people are going to protest, they're going to boycott. And what did we achieve? Putting one person in jail, 20 minutes earlier than we could have if we had just talked to him.
Others? Other questions? Oh. John.
So are you familiar with the new law that has passed in Washington regarding use of force? And then what is your opinion on how that will either help or hinder law enforcement? I've seen stuff on both sides where I've seen officers saying that, you know, we shouldn't even bother to go out on a call. And I've seen others saying, well, you're just using that as an excuse because you want to go out and arrest somebody and not have to de-escalate. But what, if you know about this, what is like the attempt that they're trying to accomplish with this law, and how do you see that playing out?
So before I came out there, I actually reviewed the law, and I can tell you that what makes it interesting is a lot of times these laws come down, as the one in Washington did, it was already in use. Seattle Police Department was already doing that. Spokane was already doing it. So a lot of times, same thing in California when they passed their law out in California. LAPD, LA Sheriff's Department, San Diego were already doing the measures that they talked about. So usually when they pass these measures, it's not without oversight and not without buy-in. Most of the larger agencies have already been doing these things. And a lot of the smaller agencies, either because of lack of training staff or just being a little bit out of touch, really don't do it. The problem is when you put laws in place like that, one of the things that you don't do usually is allocate resources to make sure that everybody has the ability to be in compliance with it. Some of the smaller agencies don't have the budget of Seattle or Spokane. So how do you get into compliance if you don't have the money to bring in trainers or develop your own training? That's the problem I see.
All right, anyone else?
I'm not shy.
Oh, Ken.
I drink my juice box.
Yakima's kind of had a history of gang violence and drug issues, etc. They almost seem to be escalating right now. Recent drive-by shootings. How do you address that? What kind of training are you thinking about there?
Yeah, I think there's a number of things. So I think that Chief Murray has a plan to deal with some of that stuff. So I would get with him to talk about specifics. But we're seeing some of these trends that are going on across the country. And some of it has to do with what we call patrol time. A lot of times our officers are so busy running from call to call to call because of a lack of personnel, a lack of staffing, that they don't have the ability to be a visual deterrent. So if you don't ever see police cruising through the neighborhoods, or you're not afraid of a police officer accidentally driving by your action, then you really don't have any reason to not do it. So if you have the staffing and the personnel to allow whatever that algorithm that Chief Murray would have for what he expects for patrol time, then you have freed up officers to engage in things like foot patrol, directed patrol, driving through some of those communities, and actually being a visual deterrent. It also have the ability for other citizens to stop and say, you know what, this is what I heard the other day, so you might want to be aware of A, B, or C. So you stop some of these things before they even happen. You can go back to the 60s, and they talked about the advent of the Panda car, or the patrol car. And what happened is the police car is great because it allowed us to cover 5 times more area than we would on foot. Just, we can go anywhere. The problem is because we're in a police car, instead of talking to people, we're driving by those people at minimum 30 miles an hour. So we lose out on a lot of that intelligence and information gathering that comes from just talking to the people in our neighborhoods. So.
Very much. I really appreciate this. I think there's some great opportunities there. Again, next week, Rotary Picnic, and then we will return to some local issues. The week following, Ron Anderson will be speaking about the benefits of the East-West Corridor project, and following that, it's the district governor's time. So he will be here, Richard DeRock. But before we close, I have one other quick thing to tell you, because I thought since we were talking about police today, and since you know I can't resist some little piece of thing from the newspaper. I think you'd be happy to know that times have changed, and I think our speaker today certainly talked about that, and times are changing again. But the city of North Yakima appointed its first full-time city police officer on June 7th, 1886, at the princely salary of $70 per month. So he probably wasn't buying a pickup. But the listed duties, which I think is pretty amusing, which did not include attending to law violators, were, number one, repairing, maintaining, and operating the city's irrigation canals, handling the dog pound, planting trees in the city, the best one, cleaning outhouses, constructing bridges over city ditches, and performing the duties of the street commissioner. But by 1904, we had grown to 4 men, and the city marshal and the mayor ordered the enforcement of the ordinance that all saloons be closed at midnight as a result of numerous noisy midnight carousals that have taken place among the denizens of the red light district. Also ordered was the enforcement of the state law against gambling insofar as slot machines were concerned, since the mayor at that time stated that he assumed there was no other gambling now being taken place in the city, except slot machines. That same year, the mayor also ordered the city police force to deal with prostitutes according to law and not otherwise. However, there was opposition from council members about this action because it would result in the prostitutes leaving town and thereby cost the city money. The argument was that collecting fines at regular intervals, as was the common practice, really meant that the business was actually legally licensed, and to cut it off would cut $500 a month from city revenues. So there you go. So that's your note for today. All right. And we are adjourned.